Three college students had a mission to enter Bone Norman Cave, stay overnight, and exit through a little-known pathway. Their trip became a fight for survival after they lost the exit and ran out of energy over 10 miles into the cave. This is the story of the Bone Norman Cave rescue. The game plan. Bone Norman Cave is found in the unassuming state of West Virginia. It's often dubbed a flyover state, with nothing too exciting to attract visitors. But locals have access to some amazing caves, like the Bone Norman Cave near Renwick. Bone Norman has a 3-mile main passage that's open to beginners. That's the most commonly traveled route. But the cave also has deeper, more complex routes that extend further, pushing the Bone Norman Cave into a system that spans 15 miles of intricate turns and sprawling earthen tunnels. But even the 15-mile length of Bone Norman is just what's been surveyed. The total length could be far longer, so if cavers get lost, they might never be seen again. The system is named for the Bone Cave Route and the Norman Route. The Norman side takes cavers through a gorgeous portion of the cave system. There are fast-flowing rivers, perfect karst or rock formations, and waterfalls. The exit of the cave through the Bone Route has less exposure to the elements, and it's generally less interesting, so even cavers who travel through Norman will often turn around instead of going all the way through. The cave can be treacherous, with a year-round temperature of roughly 52 degrees. The cave's subterranean streams, while beautiful, have heavy water flow from the Renwick River above. The perfect conditions for spontaneous flooding that could quickly kill cavers exploring its depths. In early 2012, 3 college students named Jay Buccina, Grant Blaisdell, and Matt Stevens were all in their early 20s and still relatively new to the world of caving when they decided to take the challenge of the full Bone Norman Cave route. The party of 3 left from the city of Kaiser, took a trip to the southwestern part of the state, and planned to stay inside the cave for an overnight adventure. Each of them had been to over 10 caves so far, but that's still nothing compared to the thousands of hours cave experts have logged in the dark expanses below the ground. They were slowly increasing the difficulty of their caves, which is always a good idea when learning a new skill. The difference is that when you find your limits in football or some other hobby, the stakes aren't very high. If you lose in a game, your pride stings, and you either give up or try again later. When you hit a wall with your splunking skills, it could be game over for your life. The caving world is advanced by leaps and bounds compared to what it was 50 years ago. So much safety information is available, and mock rescues are held all around the world to train experts and novices alike in the techniques they could use to save lives. But none of these prepare you for the terror of the moment when you realize you're stuck, when you ran out of luck, and no one is there to save you. Bone Norman was the biggest, most challenging cave they had been to yet. Blaisdell had been to the cave once before. So, on a Saturday, he led Buccina and Stevens through the first part of the cave to reach the spot where he turned around on his previous visit. The Caving Marathon. This first section wasn't very technical, but it took an extremely long time. Finally, after 8 hours on their first day, they reached the spot where Blaisdell had stopped his previous journey, a campsite used by researchers and other cavers who venture down here. Now make no mistake, this isn't your average campsite. There were few comforts that you'd find above, but it was relatively safe and big enough to sprawl out beside the surging river of the cave. They reached the campsite at 5 a.m. on Sunday, and they were already getting worn down. To make it through the night in the cold, damp tunnels below ground, the 3 had to pack extra equipment in large, cumbersome backpacks. They had to bring sleeping bags, extra food, and even more light than usual. The bags always feel light when you first pick them up, but a rucksack full of supplies quickly becomes a burden even on straight ground. But Bone Norman's terrain was much more challenging. This early fatigue was coming back to bite them, but they were confident that a decent night's rest would re-energize them and get them ready for the next day's journey. However, they didn't consider how sleep deprivation could impact their trip. They had all left early the day before. Each of them were from different colleges around West Virginia, so the travel time varied. It wasn't just the physical tiredness of their exploring that weighed them down, but also the mental fatigue from no sleep. Compounding the problem, they only got 4 hours of sleep in the cave. They had to cut their sleep short, in part because it was difficult to get comfortable with the rough, rocky floor under them, but they also couldn't sleep long because they had to push faster if they wanted to exit on time without worrying anyone. If they had given themselves a bit more time, they might have been okay. Time limits can evoke a primal fear in even the toughest of people, and the fear of stressing their families could also cloud their judgment. The group had 2 choices. They could turn around and head out the same path they came from, or venture onward through territory that was new to even the team's leader. They wanted to go all the way, so they started looking through passages and twisting tunnels to find the exit through the bone side of the cave system. This exit cave has some formations, but the surroundings are mostly just clay, silt, and unexciting stone. Without any noteworthy details, these passages start to all look the same, making navigation far more difficult and the challenge less rewarding. The further they went, the more uneasy they became. They kept cool and relaxed demeanors as they advanced, but within, they must have felt the slow, creeping dread start to grip their spine. Where's the exit? As fear mounts, it causes adrenaline to spike, which narrows a person's vision, leading them to miss visual information among their peripheries. As the men bravely, or foolishly, kept charging ahead, they might have been missing crucial side passages along the walls of the cave as their sight literally became tunnel vision. When the pump of adrenaline wears off and the body becomes exhausted, it isn't designed for peak levels of stress for long periods. It begins to shut down when we need it most. And that's for normal situations. These 3 were already tired with a long way to go. Contagious yawning dampened their morale as they pushed through mud and dirt. Eventually, they reached the back end of the cave. In front of them, the ground, ceiling, and walls all met into towering, solid stone, all curved and pristine. They reached a dead end. In disbelief, one asked if they were sure they checked all the side passages. They thought they had. They had missed the connection between the bone and Norman passages, a tiny crevice that extends for what feels like eternity. This first connecting path is only 1 foot high in some points, so they could have looked down it and deemed it impassable without knowing it was their way out. Even after this difficult challenge, this squeeze opens into another small and tight tunnel called Devil's Pitch before leading out of the system and onto the grassy hills above. After 11 grueling hours with no luck finding the connection, they turned back around, following the main passage of the cave back to the campsite. All the while, the cold started to chill them to their bones. At 9 p.m. on Sunday, 3 hours after they were scheduled to make it out, they made it back to the campsite. Their exhaustion should have helped them get some shut-eye, but they found only 4 more slivers of rest before they splashed muddied water onto their faces to wake up. Then, they tried to gather themselves to figure out what to do. They needed to assess the situation. Matt pulled out the food. The others did the same. They were running low despite rationing, since they spent extra time searching and had to retrace their steps. Next, they checked their light sources, also low. If they ran out of light while trying to find the exit, especially down a side tunnel, that could be a death sentence. The rest of their lives would be spent screaming through the echoing rock, trying to find one another in their campsite by touch alone in the blinding darkness. The bone exit was a loss, but they could still go back the way they came through, right? Well, the group somberly realized they didn't have enough supplies or energy to make it through the 6-hour slog to the entrance. Staying at the campsite seemed like the best idea. If rescuers came in time, they would definitely check here first. To aid in a potential rescue, they backtracked a few miles toward the entrance to etch the date and time into the mud, along with a message saying, "Waiting for rescue along stream." Then, the 3 took out emergency, high-visibility orange tape and started sticking it along the cave wall as best as they could. To suppress any fear, they turned to their raw intellect and tried to map out their situation. Since they hadn't made it home yet, Their families would have called at roughly the time they got back to camp. It was now 1 a.m. on Monday morning, so they had around 17 to 19 hours before rescuers could reach them, if they were lucky. They told themselves they weren't going to panic, and started telling jokes and stories to pass the time and to keep their minds busy to avoid thinking about the situation. Some people bury their fears with these kinds of distractions. Others are just made of steel. In the heat, or rather the cold, lingering chill of the moment, it didn't matter. As long as they could pick up their spirits and hold on to hope, they'd have a better chance of survival. They did the smart move and told friends and family about their plans before leaving. They were scheduled to exit on Sunday in the early evening before sunset. The sleepless nights of the cavers plagued their families as well on Sunday as they tossed and turned, sick with worry since they hadn't heard from the cavers yet. All sorts of situations ran through their heads. Maybe they just forgot to charge their cell phones. Maybe they found some new friends during their trip and went to the bar to hang out. Or maybe the worst scenario had come to pass and their loved ones were gone. Early Monday morning, after fitful nights with fears bouncing around in their nervous heads, family members of each of the three cavers called one another. Maybe one of the cavers called home and the rest just forgot, so it would be good to check with them. They all shared the radio silence that they were experiencing and reported the group missing. The Bone Norman Rescue. It took rescue teams almost no time to scramble into action. The Rennick Volunteer Fire Department got to the scene, and experienced cavers from nearby towns got over to the cave as fast as they could. The Rennick Volunteer Fire Department was the first to spring into action. They immediately found the cars belonging to the lost cavers, so the rescuers knew they were still somewhere inside the cave. Some members of the early rescue team thought the group had gone down the 3-mile pathway usually traveled by beginner to intermediate cavers. That conflict could have been deadly, since the college team reportedly went over 6 miles along a different route. In total, there were 25 men that made it to the search party. Conflicting reports claim the assistant chief of Rennick's fire department, April Harvey, or Doug Moore from the Mountaineer Area Rescue Group, or MARGE, were leading the rescue operation. Either way, they split the team into 5 smaller groups. After a depressing 16-hour hunt, nothing turned up. The 3-mile stretch yielded no results, no sign of the lost men. The fire department and other inexperienced crews couldn't tackle the remaining winding, complex labyrinth of the cave. After the 25 first responders had to tap out, new volunteers had their crack at it. Meanwhile, hundreds of passionate cavers all united across West Virginia and started traveling to Bone Norman to aid in the search, including 2 members of the Virginia Tech Cave Club. The 2 Cave Club volunteers could understand the minds of their fellow college students. They immediately went for the campsite while worrying about their fate. If the 3 cavers had been prepared for the main route and accidentally took the path to the deeper portion, then the cold and wet sloshes of this section could have taken hours off their lives, and time was running out. The 2 rescuers saw the messages in the mud and the orange tape. They picked up their pace. They agreed the team had to be at the research campsite. If they were alive, they would be there, unless one or more of them had been injured. The families informed them that they were well equipped, but rescuers can't always rely on this information. Overshooting assumptions on how long cavers can last could be a fatal mistake. Every second counts. Doesn't matter how long you think they have. Plus, it's common for the least experienced people in every hobby to believe that they are better and more prepared than they really are. Without experience, they don't always know what to expect. Underestimating caves has cost the lives of thousands of people. And even those who get rescued can still be scarred for life, even when they thought their trip would be a breeze. The Virginia Tech team followed the orange tape, but they didn't really need it. They were confident they knew where to go. Another thought started to worry them as they trekked through the caverns. What if the trio panicked and tried to split up? Or what if they ventured away from the campsite to search for the exit and got lost even further beyond the safety of the well-known camp? The 2 of them would do their best, but they couldn't cover the whole 15-mile stretch alone. Even a full team would take days to comb through everything, and by then it would probably be too late. Time ticked away closer to 6 p.m. on Monday, the fastest time the group thought that they could get saved. They sat anxiously waiting, but no sign of rescuers yet. Of course, earlier they calculated that they had a 3-hour window when rescuers would show up, so they tried not to lose hope. But each second brought them closer to the brink. At 7 p.m. on Monday night, smack dab in the middle of the time they had estimated, the gentle glow of headlamps started to emerge around a bend. Now, at first, they weren't sure if it was real, since the darkness can play tricks on you, but this light didn't warp or change like visions in the abyss. It steadily grew, and the 3 college students knew they were saved. After eating to regain some strength, the Virginia Tech team helped them gather their supplies, clean up the campsite, and crawled, climbed, and hiked back to the entrance on the Norman side of Bone Norman Cave. After 2 whole days underground with no light, no fresh air, no comforts of home, they exited their stone prison and were saved. Blaisdell acknowledged their folly, that they had taken on a challenge they weren't ready for just yet. Instead of folding to the fear of being lost in the underground labyrinth, Blaisdell was inspired. He went back to class just 1 day after returning home from his brush with death. He had questions for more experienced cavers. He wanted to learn from his mistakes and prepare for the next adventure. He decided to work harder, learn all the tricks of caving, and eventually he wanted to become a rescuer like those that saved his life and the life of his companions on that fateful day in Bone Norman Cave. For fishing enthusiasts in North Florida, Merritt's Mill Pond is a popular spot for catching red ear fish and largemouth bass. But even though this is what the area is best known for, most people don't realize there is something else hiding just beneath its serene surface. Caves. 7 diveable ones, in fact. In the late spring of 2020, North Florida residents who didn't know about these hidden caves soon found out about them, because something newsworthy happened in one of them, and it seemed to have come straight out of a nightmare. This is the terrifying story of Clyde Douglas Rorex and his mysterious death at Hole-in-the-Wall Cave. The event. Hole-in-the-Wall Cave is easy to miss if you're just casually floating around Merritt's Mill Pond and don't know what to look for. But tucked in a corner, amid trees and shrubbery, there is a very small dock. To many visitors, it probably seems like it's in the middle of nowhere and doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But this is the spot. Just below this dock is an opening in the underwater backside of the pond, difficult to see even if your boat is floating right above it. On June 9th, 2020, this is the same dock where experienced cave diver Clyde Douglas Rorex would have parked his boat and begun assembling his diving gear. Rorex was a North Florida local. He knew the area well and had been on similar cave dives many times before, including the one he was about to attempt solo. Rorex was prepared to dive in what is known as a side mount configuration, which many diving experts advocate as a safe and stable method. Since Rorex was diving alone, no one knows exactly when he first entered the water and made his initial descent into the cave. But alarm bells were soon raised when he failed to return at the expected time. The owner of a nearby dive shop called Cave Adventures was immediately notified. The dive shop owner's name was Ed Sorensen, and as luck would have it, he is one of the most revered cave rescue divers in the world. Ed is often called when someone, somewhere, goes missing in an underwater cave. That quiet day in early June was no different. Sorensen gathered his equipment, leapt into his truck, and drove out to Merritt's Mill Pond, unknowingly diving headfirst in what would turn out to be a tragedy that would prove difficult to explain. The recovery. The first thing Sorensen would have found when he approached Hole-in-the-Wall Cave was Clyde Douglas Rorex's boat, still tied up to the small dock, with nobody in it. Finding space to maneuver his own boat around Rorex's and tie it up, Sorensen quickly put on his diving gear and entered the water. Unlike many other caves around the world, finding even the entrance to hole-in-the-wall cave requires searching around underwater. Roughly 10 feet below the surface, near the dock, you'll find it. Initially, the cave is quite narrow and shows no signs of being anything more than a small hole in the wall of the pond, hence the name. But as experienced divers know, and Ed Sorensen knew as he made his way into the tunnel, everything inside changes after a few more yards. Sorensen first had to pass by an infamous warning sign, the likes of which are posted in numerous popular diving caves around the world. It features an image of the Grim Reaper and reminds divers there is nothing in this cave worth dying for. Sorensen passed by this sign and swam further into the cave, risking his life so that he might save the life of another diver. Shortly after the Grim Reaper sign, hole-in-the-wall cave suddenly changes from a shallow, narrow passageway into what looks at first like a big room. That is, until you look down. The room has no floor. It's what divers call a chimney. And the chimney in hole-in-the-wall cave is a nearly straight 85-foot drop down to the cave floor. Having braved such conditions under such circumstances before, Sorensen would have been steeling his resolve in preparation to descend into the dark abyss and search for the missing diver. But, to his surprise and the later perplexion of many, Sorensen entered the cave to find what he was looking for easily and quickly. The dead body of Clyde Douglas Rorex was floating not far from the entrance. The aftermath. Extracting Rorex's body from the cave proved a relatively simple task. Sadly, there was nothing Ed Sorensen or any other medical personnel could do. Rorex had died before anybody had arrived. The challenge instead became explaining what went wrong. When he was found, Rorex still had one of his diving regulators in his mouth. Both of the cylinders he was wearing were completely empty. An examination was done on all the equipment Rorex had been using that day, but strangely, nobody was able to find anything that wasn't working properly. Another valuable source of information was Rorex's computer. Rorex used his computer to plan out and keep records of his dives, and his dive at Hole-in-the-Wall that day was no different. His computer records showed that his total dive time that day was supposed to be approximately 45 minutes. Based on the rate at which he typically consumes air, Rorex had accordingly brought enough gas to last as long as 90 minutes underwater. Clearly, this meant something had gone dramatically wrong with Rorex's plan. But what? Another piece of information Rorex's computer records provided was a profile of his actual dive. Looking at changes in depth, investigators were able to see when Rorex turned around and started swimming back the way he came. Conspicuously, there was an 11 to 12 minute period where Clyde Douglas Rorex stayed at the same depth. Then, immediately after this 11 to 12 minute period, Rorex turned around and tried to make his way back out of the cave. What was he doing for those 11 to 12 minutes? Was he just taking in the scenery before heading back? Or did something more sinister take place? Since nobody could find any faults with Rorex's equipment that day, the best explanation Ed Sorensen could work out was that Rorex had maybe gotten stuck or tangled in his line, or something to that effect, and in wrestling to free himself, he used up a bunch of his extra air. Sorensen speculated that if this entrapment theory were true, he would be able to find evidence of it if he ventured back into the cave the next day. Specifically, he believed there would be major slit disturbances in the area where Rorex got stuck. Hole-in-the-Wall cave does not have a strong water flow inside it, and there aren't a huge number of places where a diver is likely to get stuck. The silt would still be lingering, and there would be evidence on the cave floor as well. This might lead to further evidence that would explain just what happened to Clyde Douglas Rorex. Sorensen dove back into the cave the following day, this time hunting for clues. Knowing the cave well, he focused on all the major areas where a diver might get trapped. But after nearly running out of his own air supply, conducting a thorough search up and down, Sorensen was unable to find any silt disturbances. In fact, he was unable to find any evidence of a struggle at all. Clyde Douglas Rorex's unexpected death was ruled an accidental drowning. But beyond that, it remains a mystery. How did such an experienced diver with proper working equipment and prior knowledge of the cave meet his demise? Why did he run out of oxygen when he brought roughly twice the amount he expected he would need? And what exactly was he doing for those last 11 to 12 minutes before turning around and trying unsuccessfully to make it out of the cave alive? Why wasn't any evidence of a struggle left behind? Of all the outdoor accidents we've covered on this channel, this is one of the more difficult ones to explain. Rorex's story, like the Grim Reaper sign at the entrance, is a reminder that nobody is immune to freak accidents. He seemingly did everything right, from preparation to training to equipment. But still, something went horribly wrong that even the leading diving experts afterward couldn't really find a complete explanation for.
In March of 2004, 6 British soldiers went to explore the Alpasat Cave in Mexico as part of a recreational team-building exercise. Their fun trip quickly turned into a fight for their lives when a flash flood sealed their exit. The divers faced even more troubles after they were rescued. The team's military ties and their strange equipment caused the Mexican government to charge them with searching for dangerous and highly illegal materials. What were UK military men doing in Alpasat, and how did they escape? Stay tuned to find out. The trip to Alpasat. Charles Milton, Chris Mitchell, John Rowe, Toby Hamnett, Jonathan Sims, and Simon Cornhill were all part of the Combined Services Caving Association, or CSCA. The CSCA provides training and recreational opportunities for active service personnel in the UK Armed Forces. The CSCA also helps beginners attain qualifications in caving that they can take into their civilian lives after they leave service. While the CSCA caters to active military personnel, the Alpasat team included a civilian scientist, and Jonathan Sims was actually a retired Army officer. The active caving team was supported by 7 additional CSCA members who stayed at the surface. The team had been planning the trip for 3 years, and they were finally ready to set out on an expedition to Puebla, New Mexico, and explore the Alpasat Cave. Officially known as the Free and Sovereign State of Puebla, the region is one of Mexico's 32 states. Puebla is renowned for its beautiful mountains that connect to the Trans-Mexican Volcanic Belt and the Sierra Madre Oriental Range. Deep in the dense landscape of Puebla is the town of Quetzalan, which is home to the pyramids of Hualichan that date back as far as the year 1200 AD. Quetzalan is nested near a tropical rainforest with plenty of humidity, along with multiple waterfalls like La Cascada de las Brisas, creating an ideal climate for the Alpasat cave network to develop over the centuries. Locally known as Cueva de Alpasat, the cave system was first surveyed by British countrymen of the CSCA team back in the 1970s. So far, explorers and scientists have mapped over 60 miles of the Alpasat cave system that extends deep underground. On March 14, 2004, the UK caving team made it to Puebla. One day later, they entered Alpasat and expected their journey to take roughly 1.5 days, but they took enough food supplies to last 10 days. The trip ended up taking longer than expected. After 2 days, the CSCA team was almost out of Cueva de Alpasat. They were about 35 minutes from the entrance, but suddenly, an unforecast storm ripped through the Puebla rainforest, bringing torrential downpours that caused a flash flood deep underground, trapping the 6 Britons. The team quickly fled deeper into the cave to escape the rising water. Trapped in the abyss. Jonathan Sims was already retired. He had faced a number of high-stress situations during his military career, but nothing could prepare him for the terror that he faced in Alpasat. In interviews, he highlights the extreme physical toll that caving and armed combat training can place on the body, but he explained how being trapped is a different beast. The mental impact of being trapped deep below the surface was unlike anything the team of soldiers and officers had faced before. In an interview with the UK news outlet The Guardian, Sims called the feeling of being trapped absolutely soul-destroying. The feeling of sheer dread was amplified by the sounds of the roaring storm that brought the floods in the first place. The sound of rushing water echoed through the narrow enclosure of the cave like drums banging in their ears. As they fled deeper into the cave to stay out of the rising water, their chances of getting out got worse. They managed to find an ideal safe spot on a cliff that extended 15 feet over an underground river, and they set up camp. While they were safe from the flood, their troubles were far from over. Most caves are fairly cold, with the average temperature being around a chilly 48 to 54 degrees Fahrenheit. However, Al-Passat's location directly below a temperate rainforest made the cave much hotter and more humid than other caves. To compensate for the rising temperatures, the team had to strip naked, removing another layer of protection that humans take for granted and further adding to the psychological burden of their nightmarish experience. Although they brought enough food to last 10 days, they had no idea how long it would take for them to be rescued, or even if they would make it out alive. Because of the uncertainty, they had to ration food, which made them weak and tired. To stay sane, the CSCA team cut a single piece of paper into 52 squares and used the scraps to play cards. Although they had to eat less, their meals were high quality, and they even had some comfort food like chocolate cake, which helped ease their burden. The CSCA team was also equipped with hydro-powered lights that could harness the flow of the subterranean river near camp, so they didn't have to worry about running out of light anytime soon. Using their light, the team read 2 novels that they brought with them to keep morale up. The cavers also had sleeping bags and water purifiers, which were vital because the flooded waters were filled with dirt and bacteria. The team also had access to a mole phone, which allowed them to contact their above-ground base. Mole phones are a type of primitive technology dating back to the 1960s. Mole phones use a single sideband 87 kHz radio wave, which has since been replaced with models like the Nikola system and the Hay phone. The soldiers told stories of where they planned to go eat after they were rescued, and they talked about their lives back home, where they grew up, and who they were to keep their memory alive as the abyss gnawed at their minds. So far, the story sounds like a frightening but textbook cave rescue story. However, this story has as many twists as the Al-Passat caves themselves. Normally, cavers go missing and friends and family members report the case to the authorities. In this case, the CSCA team had direct contact to the surface team, so they could have dispatched a rescue mission almost immediately, but they didn't. The team on the surface waited almost a week, 5 days before they contact Mexican police and rescue teams. Along with contacting local rescue teams, the CSCA also reached out to 2 elite divers from the Cave Rescue Organization, Richard Stanton and Jason Mallinson. The Cave Rescue Organization, or CRO, is a group of volunteers based out of northern England. It's one of the world's best rescue teams, and it's the first cave rescue agency ever founded. The team also branches out to rescue animals, and they also aid in mountain rescues. The legendary rescuer. Richard Stanton, who goes by Rick, has been at the heart of many world-famous cave rescue operations, making him one of the top specialists in the world. Rick got his start as a firefighter in the UK. He worked there for 25 years before retiring to lend his aid in cave rescues. While that's not most people's idea of a relaxing retirement, Rick's specialties have saved lives all over the world. He's also a member of the British Cave Rescue Council, which is the governing body for cave exploration in the UK. In his backyard swimming pool, Stanton flexed his invention skills by testing and developing 2 closed-circuit rebreather devices which absorb the normally toxic CO2 from a diver's exhalation and recycles unused oxygen back into a reservoir, which means divers need less equipment. Rick also modified his rebreathers to attach to his side rather than his back, which helps him fit into smaller spaces. Rick Stanton also set 2 world records. He set his first world record in 2004 with his fellow rescuer John Valenthin for the greatest depth achieved in a British cave at 249 feet in Wookey Hole. 6 years later, in 2010, Rick, Mallinson, Valenthin, and Renee Hauben set the world record for the longest cave penetration dive in Pozo Azul with an astonishing depth of 28,900 feet. The Al-Passat Rescue. Once Stanton and Mallinson arrived, they found strong underwater currents that forced them to delay the rescue ops. As the water decreased in speed, Stanton and Mallinson still had to travel through close to 1,000 feet of flooded tunnels and low visibility in dangerously sharp rocks. The team was relieved to see Stanton emerge from the murky waters in the Al-Passat cave, but their task was far from complete. Stanton and Mallinson had to teach some of the explorers how to dive. They used a small section of the water near the campsite to practice techniques that they would have to use to escape to freedom. Eventually, the rain ceased and the flooded regions of the cave began to dry up, which helped speed up the rescue process. In spite of the improved weather, it still took the rescuers an hour and a half to get each member to safety, 45 minutes into the cave and 45 minutes out. Once they were rescued, Mexican emergency crews examined all 6 cavers and found no major injuries. But that's when things got strange. The team was then transferred to a military hospital near the capital city of Puebla, and they claimed they were studying the Alpesat cave to improve knowledge of the freshwater reservoir in the region. However, Mexican officials were suspicious. International legal troubles. It took the above-ground CSCA team 5 days to contact Mexican authorities at the Civil Protection Agency in Puebla, and even stranger, once the Mexican officials responded, the CSCA team refused to let them rescue the trapped cavers, which created a flurry of speculation. The team said they waited to alert the authorities because they wanted to keep quiet, but that raised more alarms. What did they want to keep quiet about? The CSCA team knew that the Alpesat caves hadn't been explored by many people. The caves can only be tackled by experts, and the only people who have explored the cave are their fellow UK cavers. With that knowledge, it made sense to wait for Stanton and Mallinson rather than risking the lives of inexperienced local teams. However, officials found that the team had gas-detecting equipment, which could be used for finding radioactive material. Fears quickly grew that the CSCA team could be surveying the area for radon and uranium, which are radioactive materials used for the production of nuclear weapons. Local and national news agencies began publishing stories on the possibility of uranium in the Coetzalan caves. However, Juan Hirose, head of the Mexican Union of Speleologists, tried to dispel the fears by reminding his countrymen that the CSCA team was known for internationally, and he even worked with them in cross-country collaborations in the past. Hirose also knew the cave system well, and he proved that the caves were made of calcium carbonate, which isn't found around uranium. But that didn't stop others from calling the cavers English spies and calling for their interrogation. Once fears of illegal uranium mining were dispelled, Mexico continued to hold the CSCA team under suspicion of visa irregularities. The Mexican government required notification of active military personnel entering the country, and neither the team, the CSCA, nor the UK Armed Forces provided any notification prior to the team's journey to Puebla. Immigration officials were sent to question the 6 cavers, which sparked outrage in the UK. Officials called for a note of protest to be filed in response to the detention of their citizens, and the cavers faced up to 18 months in prison with fines of up to £180. As the situation unfolded, the cavers missed their flight home. Then, Mexico's President Vicente Fox even voiced his own concern that the cavers were there under false pretenses. Eventually, the spelunkers were freed from being trapped a second time in 2 weeks and allowed to return home to the UK. That's the outrageous story of how a group of cavers from the UK military got trapped while exploring the Alpesat cave and how they somehow got accused of mining for uranium. We also explored the life of Rick Stanton, one of the best rescuers of all time. Rick was also at the heart of the Tam Luang cave rescue from 2018, and we even covered a video about that rescue. Check it out in the link below. Before you go, let us know if you've ever explored one of Mexico's many world-class caves in the comments section. Be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling videos coming your way soon.